good evening. Welcome to all of our members and friends, and we have some governors and trustees in the room. Welcome to the Concord Museum. I'm Lisa Krasner, the Edward W. Kane Executive Director, and we are all here gathered tonight in the Churchill and Janet Franklin Lyceum, and we have a number of virtual viewers as well, so welcome everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce tonight's forum, which is a conversation with Professor Barbara McQuaid and attorney Christopher Duggan to discuss Professor McQuaid's New York Times bestselling book, Attack from Within: How Disinformation is Sabotaging America. Barbara McQuaid is a professor from practice of Michigan, at Michigan Law. From 2010 to 2017, McQuaid served as the U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan. Appointed by President Barack Obama, she was the first woman to serve her position. McQuaid also served as Vice Chair of the Attorney General's Advisory Committee and co-chaired its Terrorism and National Security Subcommittee. She serves as a legal analyst for NBC News and MSNBC, and her work has appeared in The Washington Post, Foreign Policy, Lawfare, Just Security, Slate, and the National Public Radio, and she has been regularly quoted in the New York Times, Time, Newsweek, Politico, and many other publications. Before becoming U.S. Attorney, McQuaid was an assistant U.S. Attorney in Detroit for 12 years, serving as Deputy Chief of the National Security Unit, where she handled cases involving terrorism, financing, export violations, threats, and foreign agents. She began her career practicing law at the firm of Butza Long in Detroit, and she previously taught at the University of Detroit Mercy School of Law. So McQuaid has received numerous awards as well, including being recognized by the Detroit News as the Michiganian of the Year Award. Tonight, McQuaid will be in conversation with Christopher Duggan. Duggan serves on the Board of Governors here at the Concord Museum and is also an accomplished trial and appellate lawyer and partner at Smith, Duggan, Cornell, and Golub. He has tried more than 75 cases to jury verdict in federal and state courts across Massachusetts and in several other New England states. Duggan founded the James Otis Lecture Series, an annual lecture series for high school students that addresses a different topic of law and history in the American experience. They held their annual lecture yesterday afternoon in Boston. We might hear a little bit about that today. Duggan is a fellow of the Massachusetts Historical Society, the Colonial Society of Massachusetts, and Phi Alpha Theta, and serves on the National Board of Directors for the American Board of Trial Advocates. He has served as president of the Charitable Irish Society and regularly lectures for the National Constitution Center as part of its Scholar Exchange program. He has quite a few publications for different topics, including Yawkey Way and Magna Carta, Foundation of Freedom. Chris graduated from Boston College and holds a law degree from the University of Virginia. So please join me in welcoming Barbara McQuaid and Chris Duggan. Thank you.
Thank you all. It is great to be here, and it's terrific to have such a full house. This is wonderful. So congratulations to all of you for coming. I appreciate it. One other thing about Professor McQuaid, she has a podcast, a weekly podcast called Sisters-in-Law. How many of you have seen? Oh, great. Before coming here today, she just cut it. So go home and listen to that tonight or tomorrow morning. So it's great. So, Professor, welcome. It's great to have you here. Let me start with the obvious question is this book, which is now has been on the New York Times bestseller for several weeks. Why? What caused you to write it?
Yeah, thanks. I will answer your question, I promise you. But first, I just want to say thank you for hosting and moderating this, Chris. It's really great to be here. And what a delight to be at the, I'm told it's pronounced Concord. Did I get that right? Concord. I won't say it like that. Museum. I got here a little early and I had a chance to look around and I was just blown away. I mean, they have the actual lantern used by Paul Revere. I was really, I found it like a really profound moment to see that thing. It was amazing. Great museum and great community. So I'm really thrilled to be here. And thank you all for coming out in the rain. I saw the rain and thought, oh, it's a terrible night. No one will come. And so I'm really delighted that you're all here. It's really wonderful. But Chris, to answer your question about why this book, I spent the bulk of my career as a federal prosecutor, an assistant U.S. attorney, and the focus of my work was national security cases. Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Hezbollah and Hamas and cases like that. But since leaving the U.S. Attorney's Office, I now teach a course in national security at the University of Michigan Law School. And each year, a larger portion of my syllabus is devoted to the topic of information warfare. In fact, the U.S. Department of Homeland Security now says that information warfare and disinformation is the #1 threat to the homeland. And so it's a topic I have been focusing on in those 7 years since I've been teaching, and I've read a lot about it, and I've written a lot about it, and I thought what I wanted to do was write a book accessible to the ordinary reader that could help people understand the tactics of disinformation so that we could all be less likely to be manipulated by them. I think we need to have a conversation in our country about truth, because I think while some people fall for disinformation, I think there are others who are willing to go along with the con because it is consistent with their worldview. And so they are willing to repeat false information if it is something that their identity, their tribe is saying. So for some people, you know, the election was stolen in 2020, and I'm going to say it and even if I don't believe it. Or, you know, this year during the Democratic convention, we heard all those jokes about J.D. Vance and the couch, right? Which people knew wasn't true. See, we're laughing about that. But because it's all part of identity, you know, that we care less about truth maybe and more about our tribe. And I think that if we really want to move toward a more perfect nation, we have to get past that tribe concept and be united in our quest for truth.
You raised the question. Great, thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good, we're done. Okay. You mentioned the word conversation, and we hope to have a conversation not just between the two of us, but with everybody. We're here to take questions. I'm not here to take questions. Professor McQuaid will take questions, and I'll moderate that. So please jump in when you have something. So, Professor, I'm struck by, on the back of the book, by the way, is over here for you later when we finish. But at the back, Professor Timothy Snyder from Yale. For those of you who don't know, Professor Snyder is a highly accomplished professor at Yale University, historian. He wrote this. He said, "This book was a comprehensive guide to the dynamics of disinformation and a necessary call to the ethical commitment to truth and all that democracies require." That is quite a compliment from a spectacularly accomplished historian. But I have a couple questions about it. And first, what is disinformation? How is it defined in your mind, and why is it so pernicious?
Yeah, so disinformation is a term that actually comes from the world of national security. I've had people say, why do you talk about disinformation? Why isn't it just lies? It is lies, but it's more than just lies. I mean, a lie might be that my jacket is blue, when in fact it is, I don't know what color this is, burgundy or something. That's a lie. But disinformation is more than just that. It is a lie to push an agenda and to create what's called motivated reasoning, to get us excited about something, either outraged about something that we're so angry about, or excited about something that we want to be true, and to nudge us towards certain kinds of behavior. That is disinformation, and we can talk later about some of the disinformation examples that we have seen pushed on us as a society in an effort to either influence elections or stoke division in society or undermine public confidence in elections. That is disinformation. And in contrast, I distinguish it from another term of misinformation. You might hear those terms used interchangeably by some people, and it is. I'm not saying it's wrong. But I hear that phrase a lot, misinformation, and I think of it as something a little different. In fact, you met my son yesterday. My kids sometimes refer to me as misinformation. Hilarious, right? But misinformation, I think, is the unwitting spreading of disinformation. You know, we might read something, hear something, believe it to be true, and we spread it. But those who push disinformation count on those of us who believe things in good faith and spread that misinformation to other people. I am aware of at least one time that I myself shared misinformation. I didn't do it on purpose, probably more than once. Probably all of us have at some time. But I read something online, Chris, that said that Patrick Mahomes, the NFL quarterback, right? You know, he is MVP, Super Bowl champion, had issued a statement saying that he was not going to play another down for the Kansas City Chiefs until they changed their name to something that was not offensive to Native Americans. And I thought, well done, Patrick Mahomes. That's a big deal. I mean, for athletes to take a stand is very dangerous. Remember, Michael Jordan once said that he didn't get involved in politics because Republicans buy sneakers too. But so for Patrick Mahomes to be saying he's not going to play another down, this guy makes millions of dollars a game. I had to get on that bandwagon, right, and send that out and tweet my support of his courageous stand. And later that day, I was talking to my husband and my son and said, did you guys see that story about Patrick Mahomes? And they're pretty tuned in. And they said, no, what story? I said, come on, you must have seen it. It's got to be all over the news. Kansas City Chiefs, Native Americans changing the, right? No, I haven't heard it. In fact, my husband said, that sounds kind of fake. And I said, you know, now that I say it out loud, it does sound kind of fake. But I saw it, and I know it was. It looked legit. So I went back on my phone, and I'm scrolling through. There it is, put out by ESPN. That is a credible source. And in fact, it wasn't just ESPN. It was SportsCenter, their flagship brand. I thought that's pretty good. I think I'm right here. But then I looked just a little more closely, and I saw that it was not from SportsCenter. It was something that said Sprots Center. So it was a fake, and I fell for it, hook, line, and sinker. So I took it down, and then, you know, since I've been working on the book, I have reflected, why is it that I fell for that? Why is it that that ended up in my feed? And I think it's for a couple of reasons. One is, and we can talk about this later if you like, but social media platforms are able to scrape our data from our likes and our shares and our posts, all the things that we put online. And so they know us very well. They know us better than we know ourselves. You know, right now, I keep getting ads to buy Detroit Lions football jerseys. You bet I want to buy a Detroit Lions football jersey. They're having the season of their lives. But how do they know that about me? It's because of what I post, what I share, what I like. And so they knew that I was somebody who would be a ripe target for the Patrick Mahomes post. Sure enough, I saw it, I fell for it, and I sent it out into the world. And why would anybody make up this story? Well, because it goes back to that idea of stoking division in society. Because when I looked at the replies I got back and forth, there were people saying, you left-wing such and such, PC, DEI, CRT, EIEIO, I don't know, every acronym in the book. And then, of course, there were the people arguing back at them saying, you racist, you know, such and such, leaning on tradition, you don't know how hurtful this is to communities. So there's all kinds of arguing. So, you know, I'm not the only one who got it. Lots of people got it, but it ignited all of these kinds of debates over nothing, over something that was fake. And so that, in my view, is misinformation, but the ways in which misinformation can amplify disinformation, and all designed to stoke division in society. You know, if you wonder why are we so angry with each other these days, in a way it did seem like we weren't a decade ago, I think this is a big part of what is driving it. People who are deliberately stoking that discord in society, and, you know, useful idiots like me who take the bait.
But Professor, haven't we have that since almost our founding? Certainly the Federalists had their own newspaper, and the Jeffersonian Republicans, you know, published by a guy that Jefferson was actually paying with government funds in a fake job to attack his boss, the president, when he was vice president. And if you look at those newspapers, they said things that were patently untrue. And we've had that from the beginning. Is it different now, or is this something we've just learned to live with and we're going to have to learn to live with?
I think we have always had disinformation in one form or another. I include in my book the quote from Sun Tzu, the ancient warrior who wrote that book, The Art of War, who even said back then, all war is deception. So I agree with you. It's been part of our politics for a long time. But I think there are two things today that make this problem much more acute. One is technology. You know, in those days, you had to write something in a newspaper. You had to hope certain people read that newspaper. And there are all kinds of other things people were looking at. So today, however, it is possible to send a message for anyone to send a message that can reach millions of people instantly and anonymously or in someone else's name. Do you know that New Yorker cartoon? This one's like from back in the 90s, one of my favorite. It's next to the one where the guy says, how about never? Is never good for you? That is my favorite. But this one is close, a close second, and two dogs are sitting next to each other, and one's on a computer and his buddy's sitting next to him, and he says to the other, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog, which is so true. But today, on the internet, nobody knows you're a Russian or a political operative. And so, just as an example of the way that technology has really messed with our minds, one of the topics I assigned to my students to read in my course on national security is Robert Mueller's report on the 2016 election. And not for what he did or did not find about Donald Trump and his campaign, but what he found about Russia. I mean, that investigation was always about Russia. And whether, Trump was involved as a useful idiot or coordinating as colluding, whatever, but about what Russia did. Because what Mueller found is that Russia did have those goals: to influence the outcome of the election, to stoke division in American society, to undermine public confidence in democratic elections. That was the goal, and they were fabulously successful. Because some of the things they were able to do is to use technology to create false personas online, on Facebook and YouTube and Instagram and all of these different social media platforms, to reach millions of eyeballs with fake posts posing as ordinary Americans, and mostly as American political activists. So there was Tennessee GOP was an account, and Heart of Texas, Blacktivist, United Muslims of America, Coal Miners of America. I mean, every group you can think of was represented by one of these fake users online, who is in fact, some guy in a hoodie in St. Petersburg, Russia, working for the Internet Research Agency. But for many months leading up to the election, they would post things that would appear to be consistent with what a member of that group might think. And then they boosted the followings with paid advertising so that all these accounts had hundreds of thousands of followers. But, Army of Jesus might promote things like love your neighbor. What would Jesus do? Psalm 23, John 3:16. And people would, post along, and they'd join a whole community of people. And as the election got closer, they began being more and more political. There was one meme that got posted with an image of Jesus and the devil arm wrestling, and the devil saying, "If I win, Hillary wins." And so, there are people some Christians will read that and I suppose believe it to be true, that, Hillary's bad, she's the devil. Or, I didn't know this before, but it looks like a lot of Christians think Hillary is not so Christian. Maybe I ought to think twice about my support for her. Or other people who look at that and say, look at these idiots who are sharing this and believing that somehow Hillary is the devil, like what fools they are. And so this is all accomplishing all of those objectives. There was another account called Blacktivist who posted shortly before the election, Hillary Clinton has never done anything for our community. We should send her a message by staying home on election day. We'll never know how many people actually saw that and heeded that call to action, but in a swing state like mine, Michigan, decided by a narrow margin, could have made a difference if people stayed home from the polls based on that message. And so that was 2016. Fast forward it to today, 2024, 8 years later, and the technology has advanced even more. Today, the technology allows artificial intelligence to do things like send fake robocalls into New Hampshire for the New Hampshire primary with the voice of Joe Biden, telling voters to stay home from the polls, complete with references to malarkey and everything. I mean, it was the voice of Joe Biden that was captured on all the speeches he's given that are available in the public domain, able to make it sound to a caller, to a resident who got those calls, that they're getting a recorded message from Joe Biden. There was an indictment this summer that the Department of Justice filed against a Russian group called Doppelganger that was creating fake web pages that looked exactly like Fox News and the Washington Post. And they were pushing these out so that somebody might have a link. It looks like Chris Duggan just sent out a link. Interesting story in today's Washington Post. When you click on it, it opens a fake page with a real author's name, a real photo of that writer for the Washington Post, but then an article talking about how Wall Street getting skittish over U.S. support for Ukraine, better divest now, and reading these articles. So the technology, I think, really changes what, the game from what we saw, with during the Jefferson presidential campaign. And then the other thing I think that we have today is this incredibly polarized society driven by politics. And this is, I think, a collateral consequence of political strategy and the data that is available to political strategists. So starting in 2000, Karl Rove, who was an advisor to George W. Bush, devised a strategy that turned out to be right, that rather than tacking to the middle in a general election, during a primary, everybody tries to out-conservative or out-liberal their opponents so that they can win the nomination. But then in the general election, they tack back toward the middle to curry favor with moderates and swing voters and independents so that they can win the general election. What Karl Rove discovered is that a better strategy is, rather than try to reach the moderate middle, you double down on your base. Because if you can double down on your base, those people, fire them up and get them highly motivated to show up for you. They are a reliable vote for you. Whereas these swing voters, they might vote for the other guy. It's great if they stay home. It's great if they're turned off. What I really need to do is rile up my base. Let them believe that this election is the most important election in the history of our country. And that other side poses an existential threat to our country. And so what we've seen now is both parties see that this works and adopt this strategy. And so as a result, it has caused us to divide ourselves into red versus blue, conservative versus liberal, Democrat versus Republican. And we identify so much with our tribe that we think the other side is evil, and we simply cannot even acknowledge their existence. One of the books you and I discussed yesterday is a great book by Stephen Levitsky called How Democracies Die. And one of the things he talks about in that book is how important it is for thriving democracies to have what he calls mutual tolerance. That is, I'm on a side and I will work to elect my side, but when my side loses, I acknowledge that there is another side. And we will allow them to govern, and we will respect their authority, and then in the next election we'll work like crazy to defeat them. But we recognize their legitimacy, and I think that this political strategy may be very successful in campaigns, but it is a terrible way to govern, because what is required to govern, to pass laws, is compromise and nuance, and instead we have reduced things to their simplest narratives of good versus evil. And whichever side we're on, we believe we're on the side of good and that our opponents are evil. And so that's why I think this problem with disinformation is worse now than ever before.
Lots to unpack there. I have a number of questions, but I want to go back to the 2016 election and the outcome of the Robert Mueller report. There's no doubt in that report that Russia interfered intentionally and broadly in our elections. And yet, unlike the 2020 election, where a lot of fake claims of election interference and fraud and that kind of, we don't really hear too much about the 2016 election. First, is there any evidence that Secretary Clinton may actually have won that race had it not been for Russian interference?
Yeah, I have not seen any analysis of that. And there's also no evidence that there was hacking, where votes were changed, that somebody went in and flipped votes for one side or the other, or, interfered in the hardware. But what they did was run this influence campaign. So what I just discussed with regard to the social media posts, the other thing they did, Chris, was something called malinformation, which is, we talked about disinformation, we talked about misinformation. Malinformation is the sharing of accurate information in an effort to weaponize it. So one of the other things they did in 2016, you may remember, was to hack into the Democratic National Committee and steal their emails, and then strategically dump them in a time to influence people and get them riled up. So you may recall that on the same day that the Access Hollywood tape was released. That's the one where Donald Trump talks about grabbing women by the private parts. Later that same day was when WikiLeaks first published all of these emails exchanged between members of the Democratic National Committee. Nothing lying, nothing false in there. These were their real emails, but it portrayed some people in an unflattering light. You may remember Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who was the head of the Democratic National Committee, was shown favoring Hillary Clinton and disfavoring Bernie Sanders. So that created a lot of hoopla and a lot of anger toward Hillary Clinton. It also talked about sharing of debate questions from Donna Brazile, who was then working at CNN with Hillary Clinton before a debate. So accurate information, but what's called malinformation, taking accurate information and using it for a malicious purpose. And that kind of diminished the story of the Access Hollywood, because understanding how the American media works, Russian operatives assisted by WikiLeaks knew that pushing this news story into the news would get Access Hollywood out of the headlines and put this new palace intrigue into the headlines. It is sometimes referred to as reflex control. I'm going to do this thing because I know how you're going to behave when I put it out there. So I'm going to throw this out and watch the birds flock. Here they come. And that's exactly what they did.
To follow up on that, watching the birds flock, I've read in your book and other places, Levitsky as well, where the intent of this type of assault through the use of disinformation isn't necessarily to favor one candidate or another, but it is to get Americans at each other's throats.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, the goal, according to Mueller, were those three. But you're correct that stoking division in society is a very important part of the strategy. And in fact, it doesn't even matter whether you believe something to be true or false. This is something that Putin does to his own people in Russia, which is to make it difficult for people to know what is true anyway. What do I believe? What do I not believe? And so he is known to share inconsistent statements. One day he might tell you those rockets that were fired came from NATO, and the next day he might say those rockets were fired from Ukraine, and a third day he might say those very same rockets were fired by the United States. And people hear these conflicting claims and they say, you know what, I don't know what to believe. Who knows what to believe? Or to suggest that everybody is corrupt. Sure, I'm corrupt, but so is the next guy, right? We're all politicians are corrupt. You know that. What are you, naive? It's for the suckers to think that anybody has integrity. Everybody's corrupt. We all know that, and we're mature enough to accept that. And so really degrading everybody's standards, and so that people do accept that. But what happens ultimately is people become very cynical and disengage from politics and say, I'm throwing my hands up to all of that. I'm going to focus solely on the things I can control. I can control my job, I can control my family, and the rest of it, who knows? I'm not going to pay attention to politics anymore. And that is a real attack on democracy, because democracy, of course, requires an informed electorate. We need to be informed about what's going on. But a lot of it is designed just to exhaust us and to get us to disengage from public discourse.
It seems to imply something else as well, not just an informed electorate, but leaders and politicians who are telling you the truth, at least close to it anyway. Mm-hmm. And so that leads to some pretty outlandish claims that were made during the campaign about immigrants. For example, we talked yesterday, we had a program yesterday at the Old South Meeting House where we spoke about immigration, for example, and there's always been a level of xenophobia in America from the beginning. But it seems to be in certain areas, for example, in the Charles Lindbergh area, the era, it was increased. And we're in one of those periods now, it seems, and we heard claims about immigrants, particularly Haitian immigrants, eating pets. And there's no evidence of that, and I don't think that anyone really believed it. So does it matter?
Yeah, so I think this goes back to this idea that, with this polarization, we choose our tribes, and we almost don't care whether something is true. We will repeat claims that advance our team's agenda. You know, I hail from the University of Michigan, and there is nothing that unites a group of people like a common enemy. Oh, how we hate Ohio State. 100,000 people in a stadium, all singing the same fight song, wearing the same attire. You know, it's a little like a Trump rally, right? Where they're doing the YMCA and wearing the red caps. We are united. We're sharing this spiritual communal experience, and we are united against a common enemy. So we're going to stoke division in society. We're the in-group, and they, whoever they are the bad people. And throughout history, they have been different people, right? In Hitler's Germany, it was the Jewish people. They are the source of all evil. And then when you mistreat those people, your team, the in-crowd, won't simply be silent. They'll cheer you on because you've convinced them that they are bad and the enemy and awful. It is what allowed people to justify slavery, right? To convince people that African Americans were a lesser form of human. And so it was applauded. You know, they couldn't survive on their own. Well, this is a blessing to treat people in this way. And convincing people that this is true, because otherwise we could never live with ourselves. And so who is the common enemy now? It is other. It is foreigner. It is immigrant. We certainly have an immigration problem in this country. But you know, stoking division in society isn't going to solve it. Unity and compromise, it's what's going to solve it. But instead, we have people with claims like they're eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio. And why that particular lie? Well, in part, it is because it suggests that they are other, right? They eat pets. They are barbaric. They do things different from what you and I do. They are a lesser form of human. They're animals. They eat our pets, not to mention the fear that you might lose Fluffy. That is also, people, you know, these days we treat our pets like members of the family. The idea that these, you know, less than human people are coming to take our beloved family members is stoking fear. It's uniting us against a common enemy. And if you hear some of these themes, you'll see it wherever you look. Like there's immigrants, that's one of the outgroups. The LGBT community, they want to groom our children for pedophilia. There's no evidence of that. But again, fear-mongering, transgender rights. You know, this is an issue we can debate. This is an issue that probably affects a small percentage of the American public. And this was one of Donald Trump's top ads, at least in my swing state of Michigan. We saw these ads again and again and again about transgender rights. And what was the tagline? Kamala is for they, them. Trump is for us, right? This division in society, us versus them. And even listen to the way Donald Trump refers to his political opponents. He consistently does not call her by her proper name, which we all know is comma, la, right? Like comma in a sentence and la, 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 as we heard from her little nieces at the convention. But Trump will deliberately say Kamala and mispronounce her name. And why does he do that? One of the ads was, I, Kamala Davy Harris. Why does he do that? Because he wants to remind you that she is other. David Perdue, who was running for Senate in 2020, lost that election in Georgia, referred to her during a campaign event as Kamala, however she says it, Kamalama, you know, Lama Lama Ding Dong, whatever it is, because she's other. Just in the same way Trump previously referred to Barack Obama repeatedly as Barack Hussein Obama, to remind you that he had a middle name that sounded different. Us versus them, united against a common enemy. This is a tactic of disinformation, and one that we really need to overcome if we are going to advance toward a more perfect union and not completely divide into what Marjorie Taylor Greene likes to call for, a national divorce.
That leads me to another part of your book.
We could talk about her for a long time, but I'd rather
not. Right. Yeah. You'd be surprised that she posted some things today. But that leaves you another part of your book. But before, is there anybody with any questions before we get on to the next topic? Yes, sir. We have a, I'm sorry, forgot we were streaming, but so we have a...
Karaoke or questions, your choice.
Right, I'm sorry.
Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to listen to you. Thank you for being here. You spent a lot of time talking about external sources of disinformation, but then your title says attack from within. Kind of sounds like enemies within.
Yeah, he stole that from me, by the way. I thought of it first.
Anyway, I wonder if you could say more about the title, given the importance of external sources.
Yes. Well, so there are external sources, and we learned some lessons from that in 2016. But in 2024, these robocalls with Joe Biden's voice were originated by two men in Texas. So that is coming from, the call is coming from inside the house, for those of you who remember the old horror movies. Tactics that Donald Trump engages in. This idea of eating pets is all about stoking division in society. The Stop the Steal movement, the idea that the election was stolen in 2020 has zero evidence in fact, and yet still a majority of Republicans, 30 million people, believe that in fact that election was stolen. There were audits. There were lawsuits. All of them failed. That was an attack from within. And yet, Donald Trump still couldn't take no for an answer. And so when he lost every audit, when he lost every lawsuit, he still called for people to come to Washington to stop the steal. He was stealing the election. And yet he accused the other side of doing exactly what he was doing. And so when he called people to Washington, I'm sure there were some people who genuinely believed that the election had been stolen because they'd heard it again and again. It was amplified on Fox News. I'm sure people saw it on social media. But they did something that in this country is something it just violates our founding principles. We are a country that agrees to the rule of law. We have lots of different viewpoints in this country, and that's wonderful, and we have spirited debate. But when we have differences, we agree to resolve our differences at the ballot box and in courts of law. And Donald Trump lost in both of those places. What you may not do is resort to vigilante violence. And that's what he called for. Remember Liz Cheney said he summoned the mob, lit the fuse, and watched it burn, which is exactly what he did. And that was an attack from within. I'm sure there were people at the Capitol on January 6th of 2021. 1,500 people have now been charged with crimes ranging from trespass to assaulting police officers to property damage. I mean, they spread feces on the walls of the U.S. Capitol. Imagine defacing a historic building like that. And seditious conspiracy for those who wanted to stop the peaceful transfer of presidential power, something we have done in this country since the days of George Washington and John Adams. And while I believe some people there genuinely believed that the election had been stolen, they still can't use brute force to just take what they believe is rightfully theirs, right? I mean, imagine if you had a dispute with your bank. You think the bank owes you money. You can go talk to the manager at your local branch. You can write a letter to the head of the bank. You can even file a lawsuit. But if you lose at all of those stages, at some point, you're done, even if you still believe that you were wronged, right? What you cannot do is go into your bank branch, reach into the drawer, and take the money you think you're entitled to. That would be bank robbery, and you would be rightfully prosecuted for that. And that's what those people did that day. They violated the rule of law to achieve the result they thought was just, and that is not how we operate in America. So I discuss that attack from within in the book as well as other examples. But certainly we can expect attacks from hostile foreign adversaries, but we have the power to control our own country, and I think we need to work together to address that internal attack.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I think we need to. I'm sorry, I should have said this. We're recording here and we're streaming, so welcome all questions, but we have a microphone, so everyone can hear. Yeah.
So you laid out the idea of how much more information there is now. We're in the fire hose of information. Do you anticipate a huge realignment with regard to control of speech? Since we really can't stick with Brandeis's concept of, the remedy for disinformation is more speech, because clearly that's not happening anymore.
Yeah, such a good question. And I don't know whether we're in for a realignment of speech. I do believe in that idea that more speech is the answer for false speech, bad speech, wrong speech, evil speech. But where I think we have fallen astray and failed to keep up with evolving technology is in this statute known as Section 230 of the Telecommunications Decency Act of 1996. In 1996, Congress passed a statute that probably made a lot of sense in 1996. We weren't on social media. There was no social media back then. And so in an effort to foster creativity and innovation and investment, Congress passed Section 230 that said that social media platforms, internet service providers is what they call them specifically, would be immune from civil liability for anything posted on the internet. And that gave people the freedom to develop and innovate without worrying, looking over their shoulder, what if some goofball posts something that defames another person? Now I'm going to get sued for that. I just can't be paying attention to that thing. I'm busy building and innovating and doing all these things. So we created civil liability for those people. You can still sue the person who posts, but you can't sue, Facebook or X or Instagram or any of these companies. And it makes sense at the time. But here we are almost 30 years later, and I think that those rules maybe don't work so well today. It's a little like raising a baby alligator in your bathtub. It's really cute when it's small, but at some point it grows into a man-eating predator, and maybe you need to change the way you're handling things. And so I think the time has come to think about maybe some modest adjustments to Section 230. I don't know that I would say they're completely subject to liability, but rather than looking at the content of what's being posted there, I think we should think about modifying the processes that are used on social media. So I think one of the most sinister things that have been done since Elon Musk took over Twitter and renamed it X, which is very confusing because he's also got SpaceX and there's lots of things that are X, but I digress, is adjusting the algorithm. So when he first bought it, he actually published it to make it true. Look, everybody, here's the algorithm, and I want you to see that it's all fair. So an algorithm, as you may know or may not know, is simply computer code that tells the social media platform what to elevate and what to demote. And so if you elevate something, that's what you see, and there could be other messages that get demoted. And so a recent study showed that people who study, kind of reverse engineered the algorithm, that since July, the algorithm has been very different and it is no longer publicly accessible. And it has been elevating right-wing extremist speech, hate speech, threatening speech, bullying speech, and demoting other speech. So we've got one man, Elon Musk, with his hand on the dial that's saying what I'm going to elevate and what I'm going to demote. I think that kind of process is where we ought to focus our regulatory reform. There was a whistleblower for Facebook named Frances Haugens, and a couple years ago, you may remember, she was kind of a cause celeb. She testified before Congress, and she said, it's not the content, it's the algorithms. She didn't say stupid. It's not the content stupid, but I think she thought it. It's not the content, it's the algorithms. And she explained how at Facebook what they had done, and she quit. She was a data scientist there, and she quit her job because she just couldn't stomach it anymore. What she saw at Facebook was they were promoting content through their algorithms that was expected to generate outrage. Because the more outraged someone was when they were online, the longer they stayed on the platform. So they saw something like, oh, can you believe this? I got to send that. Can you believe this? Or that's terrible. I'm going to write my rebuttal and post that. And the reason is the longer people are online, they call that engagement, the more money they could charge to advertisers. So outrage equals engagement. Outrage equals money. And that was her testimony. So thinking about now Elon Musk, I don't know if his goal was money or to promote Donald Trump as president so that he could be appointed to be the head of, what are we calling it, the DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency, which ironically enough has two heads. I'm not sure how efficient that is with Vivek Ramaswamy. But I think, so regulating the algorithm, I think, is important. Also regulating the way our private data is scraped and shared and sold to data brokers. So our likes, our shares, all of that allows them to build portfolios on all of us. There was a group in the 2016 election known as Cambridge Analytica, not this Cambridge, the Cambridge in England. And Cambridge Analytica was founded by, among other people, Steve Bannon. And it was researchers who were collecting all this private data on people to build voter files on everybody. They claimed that with 17 data points, they could predict with 94% reliability who you would vote for. And then to nudge you to get out and vote for that person by sending you social media messages designed to get you riled up and get you to the polls. So why can't we regulate the way they capture our private data and then sell it to the highest bidder? I think that's something that we can do. So I think focusing on the processes is probably, in my view, more consistent with our First Amendment values and likely more effective in getting us back to normal conversations. And by the way, I am this is not a paid endorsement, but have you heard of Blue Sky? I've been on Blue Sky and Threads lately, and it's quite nice. You know, it is, you know, it's what Twitter used to be, kind of minus all the mean stuff. Mm-hmm. So I've been on Blue Sky and Threads lately. Those are kind of nice places to hang out.
Great. That leads to what I think is one of the best parts of a very, very good book, Chapter 9, mm-hmm. and the title is "We Alone Can Fix It." You talked about one part of that, but you have a number of suggestions.
Yeah.
One of them is the demand side. What did you mean by that?
Yeah, so we've already talked a little bit about the supply side of disinformation with the algorithms and the scraping of the private data. But the demand side is also a place where we can focus. You know, as a prosecutor, I was always thinking about my goal wasn't just arrests. My goal was to reduce crime. And so arrests and prosecution were only one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is prevention. And so if you can prevent, that's another good way to reduce crime. In the same way, to reduce disinformation, we've talked about the supply side, but the demand side, all of us who are out there reading all this stuff online. So one of the things I think that we can do is to improve our own media literacy. And I think it's already getting better. I mean, I think in 2016, you know, people fell hook, line, and sinker for all of this disinformation. And I think today we're a little more skeptical. You know, I don't want us to get to the point where we don't believe anything, because that's where, you know, the situation we have in Putin's Russia, where people are so cynical they don't believe anything and they disengage from politics. But, you know, practicing good media literacy. And I think we are advancing as a society in that regard. You know, there was a time when motion pictures first began, and audiences would be in a movie theater and they'd see, you know, a train coming toward them down the tracks, and they'd all run out of the back door of the movie theater. They dive to the floor. You know, today we can see all kinds of, like, you know, chainsaw murders, and we don't stop eating our popcorn. We're watching those things. So I think we can learn to be more savvy consumers of media as we see these things. And I think we are already there. So I've got a whole list of things that you can do in the book, but there are very good fact-checking websites if you care to take the time to do that. But also when you read something, there are very good practices. Perhaps some of you already use these things, but fairly common sense. And I replicate a program that was done in Finland, where because of their proximity to Russia, they have been bombarded with disinformation for decades, and they've introduced media literacy into their schools. But they teach them very basic skills, like when you read something, look and see if there is a second source for that information. Don't just take it at face value if it's being reported by one source. You know, we probably don't have the time to do that for everything we read, but a surprising or interesting or noteworthy article, we should check and see if there's a second source. If only I had done that with the Patrick Mahomes story. I could have saved myself some embarrassment and aggravation. But looking for a second source, that's one. Making sure the source you're reading is a credible source. So, you know, Patriot Girl 52 online is probably not a credible source. It is probably either a Russian operative or somebody working, you know, for Roger Stone's Bag of Dirty Tricks. So, you know, don't trust those, but, you know, legitimate news outlets, I think, are something that you can trust, and read carefully, lest it say Sprott Center and not Sports Center. Click the link. Some of these fake websites I was telling you about, the Washington Post and the Fox News fake websites, if you looked closely at the link, it didn't say WashingtonPost.com. It was like WashingtonPostZT2.com. They did something called crowd squatting. to take over the domain that was really close to Washington Post or Fox News, but not quite. So if you look at those things carefully. When you read the article, make sure that there's evidence to support the claim, right? When I prosecuted law, you handle cases. You can't just make stuff up, right? And ask a jury to decide your case. You have to show them evidence. Every fact should have attribution, based on this, based on that. Maybe it's a quote from an expert. Does the expert have the expertise in this field? All of those things, I think, are very important. And the last one I'll give you is the importance of a headline. Headlines can be very misleading these days, and that's because they are trying to get you to click on the story. So the story often bears very little resemblance to the headline. I've been looking for a good example, and I found one recently. Anybody a women's basketball fan here? Or I love women's basketball. It was in the New York Times headline, "Inside the Caitlin Clark Media Meltdown." And if you know who Caitlin Clark is, she's this very good women's basketball player. She was a star at the University of Iowa. She's now in the WNBA, just won Rookie of the Year. But, as the newcomer, got a lot of the whole, welcome to the big-time rookie, and a lot of scrutiny. And so I thought, oh, no. Caitlin Clark must have finally snapped with all the pressure and had a temper tantrum or something inside the Caitlin Clark Media Meltdown. Oh, no, what happened? I better read the story. And if you thought it was Caitlin Clark who had melted down, you would be wrong. Because what, in fact, the story said was that at a press conference, it was a member of the media who had launched into a profanity-laced tirade about her. So the Caitlin Clark Media Meltdown was not about Caitlin Clark. It was about a reporter talking to Caitlin Clark. So that was the Caitlin Clark Media Meltdown. So really important to read not just the story, but also the headline. So those are some of the things we can do, I think, from the demand side. And I have some other suggestions in the book as well.
You do? One of them that occurs to me as a tort lawyer, you hit on it a little bit, is the immunity provision in the statute. And I'm a big fan of the tort system.
Yeah.
As opposed to regulatory oversight by a government agency, we have juries over. And as you say, the jury filters evidence, pro and con, and then comes to a verdict. Speak the truth.
Yeah, so I think there's definitely room for tort law in disinformation. I mean, one is defamation, and we've seen some pretty good examples of that working well. Rudy Giuliani, who was, hit hard with a very big verdict for defaming Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman, the election workers in Georgia. That was a good one. Fox News got something like $775 million settlement, Dominion Voting Systems from Fox News for airing false claims about voting machines malfunctioning and switching votes from Trump to Biden. That's a good example. Although it's not perfect, I thought, well, there it is. Fox News has finally learned their lesson. They fired Tucker Carlson like the following week, and I thought, all right, here we go. And then like a week later, I saw them posting something with an image of Joe Biden, and it said something like, wannabe dictator indicts political rival, so here we go again. So I don't know that it's perfect, but I do think that there's room there. And something else that's interesting, Chris, I'm teaching this course this semester on deepfakes and disinformation, and I had a law student come up with an idea of using nuisance law to go after some of these social media platforms, creating an exception to Section 230 for nuisance when it results in harm to an individual. So, there was a case involving a young man who saw one of these online challenges with a chat bot who ended up killing himself because the chat bot told him to. And so perhaps there's room there for a tort claim as well. So I think there are some solutions that can come from our tort bar. Maybe there's some an honest living for you to make in this field, Chris.
About time, right? Great. Any more questions from the floor? We got a couple. In the back, please.
I have a question about the acceptance of lying. Last week, my granddaughter told me that Trump was the worst president ever. He told lies, and she said, I wanted Kamala Harris, and she's 4 years old.
Out of the mouths of babes.
But my question is, what about this? Maybe this is naive, but the media does not call out people that tell lies. When Trump would sit there, I grew up with Walter Cronkite on the news at night. I believed everything he said. But they don't seem to say anything when obvious lies are told. Why?
Yeah, I think that is changing. I think the first time Donald Trump ran for president, the media just couldn't get their heads around how to cover him. I think they're still struggling with it because journalists are trained to tell both sides of the story. Hillary Clinton says X, Donald Trump says Y. You figure it out for yourselves. But I think we are now seeing more fact checking, although we have also seen, I think Timothy Snyder refers to this as obedience in advance, which is really troubling. You know how the Washington Post and the LA Times declined to endorse a candidate when they started seeing this polling data that, oh, he might win. I better not ruffle the feathers anymore. And fact checking. Remember in the first debate between Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, there was fact checking, and Trump got all mad because he was fact checked more than Kamala Harris was. Well, yeah, because you were the one who was lying. And then remember, I forget which network did the vice presidential debate. They said, we're not going to fact check at all. We're going to leave it to the viewers to sort out. So they went back to that whole thing. And then at one point when J.D. Vance repeated they're eating cats and dogs, and the moderator said, no, the city administrator has said that's not true. He said, I was told there'd be no fact checking. He was outraged that somebody actually, called him a lie. Yeah, I think that is really a problem. And so I hope the media learns how to deal with this, because I do think we need to call out all out lies. Now, of course, the facts and what is true can be complicated because sometimes there are half-truths or there's a germ of truth. Like Hunter Biden's laptop, oh my gosh, to sort that thing out is very complicated. You can find it on factcheck.org and Snopes.com where they go through what is true and what is not true. But it's really complicated. And so it's hard to just put up a graphic and say what is true and what is not true because it can be very nuanced. And in our soundbite world or our 180 character tweet, it's very difficult to appreciate nuance. We don't have time to read the report. We're just going to let a proxy tell us what it says instead. And so I think it does create challenges. But I would like to see reporters, call out lies and call them lies when they are like eating cats and dogs in Springfield is an absolute 100% lie. It was investigated and there's zero evidence for that. But, disproving a fact can be difficult as well. Has no one ever eaten a cat or dog? I don't know, but there's no evidence of it. But I agree with you. I think it would be better if I think journalists need to evolve a little bit in how they cover the news, and that could be an important part of it.
Anyone else? Time for one more question. And Professor McQuaid will be around afterwards. And
I'm happy to chat with you after too if we don't have time for them.
I'm giving you the workout here.
First, thank you very much for speaking with us tonight. It's been a real pleasure. At one time, there was the concept, in fact, a law about network neutrality.
Yes.
And that has been done away with. Is there any push to restore that and do away with some of the duplicity that one encounters today?
Yes, such a good point. It's called the fairness doctrine. I'll tell you what I know about the fairness doctrine, and I don't think there's a plan to resuscitate it, but there was a time when broadcast media was relatively new. Because the broadcast spectrum is finite, you had to have a license to broadcast. And so the concern was, I'm going to have this license and I'm going to share only one side of debate, and I'm going to become a mouthpiece for propaganda. And so back when we cared about public virtue, a long, long time ago, the FCC, Federal Communications Commission, said, we want to prevent that. So we're going to, it is a condition of having one of these licenses for radio and then later television. If you present one side of an issue, you must also present the other side of the issue, because we want consumers of information, the public, to hear both sides. So if you're going to talk about raising tax rates, you've got to have somebody else come on and talk about lowering tax rates, or whatever is the opposite side of that issue. And that worked pretty well for broadcast media. During the Reagan administration, we saw, of course, a complete eradication of all regulation. There's a wonderful book recommended to me by my cousin Maureen Lindsay called Evil Geniuses that I have read, and talks about the deregulation that occurred in the 1980s that has, in some ways perhaps sparked business, but in other ways has created a lot of hardship. And one of them, I think, is the elimination of the fairness doctrine. At the time, there were two reasons for eliminating it. One was a concern that it violated the First Amendment because we were telling broadcasters what they had to say. The government was, not only can the government not stop you from saying things, but it also cannot force you to say things. Maybe it never got litigated, but the First Amendment is not absolute. If there's a compelling governmental reason and the rule is designed narrowly tailored to achieve that reason, then that is still consistent with the First Amendment. So that was never tested. But the other reason was the advent of cable television. Bless you. With cable television, we said, the media is no longer finite. We still have these licenses for broadcast media, but cable television is going to revolutionize the world. There will be hundreds of channels, and people will be able to get their news wherever they want. And so we don't have to be worried anymore that we've got this monopoly and only Walter Cronkite is getting into our living rooms. We can watch all of these different channels. And so the need for the fairness doctrine has really gone away. So those two reasons caused the Reagan administration's FCC to eliminate the fairness doctrine. But you know what happened as a result of it? We got Rush Limbaugh. We got Fox News, because they didn't have to give the other side of the story. Instead, they could go on a 24/7 rant about all the things, the woke agenda and how awful all these people are, and they are eating cats and dogs, and they're grooming your children for pedophilia, and they look down upon you, and all those other things. And so, the result of the elimination of the fairness doctrine, I think, has been part of this, echo chamber where the right and the left don't even have a shared set of facts because we're all hearing completely different news reports.
So I'm going to save the last question for myself.
Okay, very good.
One of the suggestions you have in Chapter 9 is to promote civic engagement.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell us a little bit about how that can be used to combat effectively the war of disinformation?
Yeah, so there's a great book that I cite in my book called Bowling Alone, written by Robert Putnam. I see some nods, you probably read it. He wrote this book in 2000, so 24 years ago, and he talked about how we as a society were becoming, more stay-at-home, more homebodies. We were less likely to interact with people across differences. And he uses bowling leagues as his metaphor, but labor unions, faith communities, the places where we gather together. And it may be we're never going back to those kinds of things in the same numbers, but the value of civic engagement. I might meet somebody who is very different from me. I might meet somebody who has very different political views, but I can learn because we're working on something together. We work in the same workplace. Then we have a lot in common. We share interests in baseball, and we care about our children, and we care about our health, and we care about our community. And so even though we might disagree on politics, he's not the enemy, and I can understand that. And so whatever we can do to get people more engaged across difference, I think would be really important. One of the other great tragedies of recent years is income disparity, which causes us to live apart from people who might have different kinds of professions and different kinds of jobs. And so we don't have those natural interactions. But I think there are a lot of ways we can promote getting out and civic engagement. Certainly work from home and the internet is now even worse than it was in 2000. In 2000, Robert Putnam said it was television that was keeping us all home, and the splintering of some of these civic organizations. But I think anything we can do to get out in the world and meet people across difference. Coming out to a book talk and listening to a speaker, right? Maybe you disagree with some things I said tonight. That's fantastic. Maybe you'll go home with the people you came with and you'll discuss these issues, and maybe you'll disagree. And that's fantastic, right? Because you'll share ideas. And even if they don't convince you, it might sharpen your own arguments when you hear these different things. So I think anything we can do to get out in the world, to listen to other people speak, to interact with people, and to join something, whether it's the board of the Concord Museum,
Very good, by the way.
Yeah, thank you. Or
Almost.
whatever it is you care about, a garden club, right? Coaching youth sports, whatever it is, wherever we can get together across difference, I think we can really promote the kind of unity that we need to bring our country toward a more perfect union.
Great. Well, thank you. this conversation could go on for hours and hours, but we're out of time. In fact, I'm over time, sorry. But thank you very much. Thank you to the Concord Museum for hosting us today. And thank you all for coming, and Professor particularly, one more time for Professor McQuaid. It was just...
Thank you.